The Corvette, the best example of an American sports car ever. The ultimate blue-collar working achievement. Proof that if you work your entire life, you can have a sports car in your driveway, and all that hard work is paid off. As much as the burger and Uncle Sam are synonymous with the USA, the Corvette is iconically American. The Corvette has been alongside us through our ups and downs. Even though it started off slow, and there were times where it nearly stopped, it still is somehow here. How is an American race car, designed by rebels, taken on the European roadster, and still at times won?
They call her Corvette, and she belongs to the highway.
In the 1950s, General Motors, the group that owned Chevy, was one of the biggest car companies in the world. But even with all the cars they're making, cars were so boring. They're focused on making cars for families. No sport intention. The Camaro wasn't around for another decade. If you're going to get an exciting car, you had to look other places across the seas, either in Japan, Italy, or Germany. And the Chevy wanted to create their own that would compete with the imported European and Japanese cars. In 1953, Chevy created their own spin on the European sport car, with an American V6 and beautiful body styling. But there were some major problems with this. The European cars were very good because they were lightweight and great touring coupes, which worked really well on winding roads. But this clashed with the American ideal of a straight-line dragster. The car had some great concepts for a cheap, fun sports car. The car was severely underpowered, however, with a V6. But thankfully, Zorah Duntov stepped in, a Belgian engineer who had gained the nickname Father of the Corvette when he saved the Corvette from being a forgotten car that was underpowered, when he put Chevy's small block V8 in it, and a camshaft that allowed the Corvette to get up to 225 horsepower. Zorah used styling similar to the SL300 and added some creature comforts, and that's when the American dream about a Corvette was born, because it was comparable to imported European cars in speed and looks, but the price was much cheaper. The C2 Corvette had some exciting concepts by the engineers, but they liked the Micro Shark the best. But Zorah could not get the idea of a mid-engine Corvette out of his head. But the other designers said he was crazy and shot down that idea. And the C2 Corvette got put into production as a front-engine car. But they did use better technology in the car, such as better rear suspension, which was independent. And knowing that the new Corvette would sell very well with racers, they offered a race-ready platform, the famous Z06, a faster and more sporty version of the Corvette. The C2 kept getting upgraded throughout its production, and near the end, the Stingray was making 560 horsepower. After 5 years of the C2, Chevy created the C3, and the Mako Shark styling continues, and now with removable roof panels. Aside from some styling changes to the body, the rest of the car was nearly identical to the prior C2 Corvette. Then the Chevy would later drop in a heavier power plant that created slightly more power, but the Corvette continued to be underpowered and out of date until 1982, the last year that they made the third generation of the Corvette. Before the C4 came out, it looked like Zorah would have his dream come true, a mid-engine Corvette. But Chevy didn't figure out how to put a V8 behind the driver, even though Ferrari and Lamborghini have been putting V12s behind cars for years. Even though it was unfortunate that the engine wasn't in the back, the C4 was much more advanced. The C4 was completely redesigned, much better than the C3. The engineers didn't focus as much on power, but on lightness and handling, and so they also gave it some of the best brakes that the Corvette had ever seen. Now more than ever could the Corvette complete a track and go around a corner. There is no other place in America at this time that was making a car near this caliber. The Viper was years away, and the Mustang had a 4-cylinder engine at this time. Alongside the performance of the C4, there were some special editions, such as the 34th edition and the 40th edition, featured in white and ruby red, and the Grand Sport. Of all these additions of the redesign made the C4 one of the most exciting Corvettes since the C2, and it sold like crazy. In 1 year, selling 50,000 Corvettes. During its 13-year production, almost 400,000 Corvettes were sold, but near the end of it, when the technology got outdated a little bit, the sales began to dwindle. In 1992, with the Corvette sales going down and facing bankruptcy, GM was planning on creating the next generation of Corvette, but they cut all the funding and removed Corvette from the future of their plans. Instead of using a sports car with tons of history and heritage to build themselves back, they focused on Pontiac. I don't understand it either, and luckily Joe Spielman didn't either, and he had a different plan of what the future of GM would look like. Joe Spielman loved the Corvette, from buying his first one when he was in college to working his way up the ranks at Chevy till he got his dream job, working on the Corvette. Joe and Dave Hill were working on the Corvette when they heard about the news about the funding being cut. They rolled the prototypes and pieces of the car into the warehouse, where no one could see it. Joe and Dave used the help of Jim Perkins, the general manager of Chevy. Once he knew that they stashed the car, he was excited and motivated to continue working on it. Perkins took extra funding out of the advertisement team and put it to development of the new Corvette. He also used the help of Russ McLean. Russ had worked on the Mexico production lines to make them more efficiently. He knew everything about getting everything you could out of a dollar and not overpay anything. These four worked tirelessly on weekends and off days to design the C5, risking their jobs, knowing that their careers were on the line. But they risked it all because they knew that the Corvette was special. And they did indeed create something special. For one, the LS1 engine. Every single person uses one of these, whether they have a kit car, a resto mod, or a swap motor. From Euro cars to Japanese cars, and of course American cars, the LS1 is one of the most used aftermarket engines. It's a simple pushrod engine, used forever, but built with modern technology. Another big step they did was making the transaxle in the rear of the car. By having the engine and the transaxle on different ends of the car, it gave the 50-50 weight distribution that so many cars desired to the Corvette. And as soon as they drove it, they knew they had created something special. Confident by how it drove, Jim Perkins went to a meeting with the heads of GM to convince them that the Corvette meant something to the United States. And it worked. The C5 went into production, and just like the C4, it sold like crazy, making the C5 not just one of the best Corvettes so far, but also one of the most important, showing no matter how hard you try, you can never kill the Corvette. As revolutionary as the C5 was, one of the best things it did was create the groundwork for the C6. Working on the C6, GM really wanted to refine the C5, instead of completely redoing it. It is often described as an evolution of the C5 instead of completely redoing it. The C6 was able to keep up with many European supercars, but being half of the cost of a 911. If you wanted to go fast on a budget, you'd buy a C6. The C6 also bought back the Z06 spec, a higher performing model that hadn't been with the Corvette since the C2. And now that the Corvette was at no risk of being stopped or going bankrupt, the only thing they could do was race it. And for the first time in decades, in 1999, a Corvette was spotted at Le Mans. 2 years later, the Corvette would take home a 1-2 finish, and again for the next 3 years. When the C6R was introduced, it took home victories of its own. You have to say that the C5 and C6 have some of the most silverware for a GT car, and definitely one that wasn't even supposed to be made. After 4 years of development, in 2014 the C7 was first revealed in the Detroit Motor Show. By the time that Chevy was making the C7, they were really stepping into their own. Even though the mid-engine and rear-engine layouts were considered, Chevy kept with the front-engine design that had been on the previous Corvettes. The Corvette also offered more options, such as a performance exhaust and a 6, 7, and 8-speed transmission. but the Corvette kept making the Z06 and ZR1 as the high-performance models, the ZR1 being the top dog, having 750 horsepower and a top speed of over 180. One more interesting thing that Chevy did with the C7 is trying to get more young people to drive the Corvette. Compared to other sports cars, Chevy owners are twice as likely to be 55 or older. They understood that you don't want your car to be known as the old people car. Even though the C7 had been the fastest and best handling, it still was not the mid-engine car that so many of the engineers who worked on the Corvette prior wanted, like Zorah, who saved the Corvette. The C8 Corvette is a historic Corvette because it's the first ever Corvette to go mid-engine, like so many engineers wanted. The Corvette has now gone to supercar status, having countless engineers and scientists working on the aerodynamics and technology, being revolutionary for creating the mid-engine platform at a price point that's achievable at $60,000. Now the Corvette doesn't just keep up, but beats supercars, like the R8 and Porsche 911, which means that you can't get much better for the price point of the C8 Corvette. This might not have happened without Zorah, who saved the Corvette from being forgotten in the 50s, or Russ, Jim, Dave, and Joe, who saved the car in the 90s and created the format for the C6 and C7. When people says that the US needs the Corvette, they're right. There's a reason why in the 70 years, almost 2 million Corvettes have been sold since 1953. The Corvette is an icon of American culture. Throughout the US's lowest points and highest points, the Corvette has always been there. Thank you for watching. You've gotten to the end of the video, so please leave a like and subscribe.